Wednesday in Tryon, North Carolina, on higher ground on Melrose Mountain. Just got back from church and had a great lesson from Matthew chapter 6. And not to worry, consider the birds of the air, the lilies of the field. See how God supplies them, because God knows our needs already. Good lesson. Tonight I wanted to teach you a lesson from Daniel, one of my favorite areas of the Bible. Daniel learned a very delicate balance between learning the negotiable and the non-negotiable. Daniel was born around 623 BC, 623 years before Christ, likely in Jerusalem. More than likely he came from a noble Jewish family, but he was born at a bad time. He was born at a time when Israel was taken into captivity by Babylon for 70 years. Most of Daniel's life. You wouldn't say that that was perfect timing, but because he was smart and well educated, he was taken by the Babylonians to be a servant, be trained how to serve the king and the royalty of Babylon. Some of the prophets of his day were Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Ezekiel. When he's taken to Babylon, the very first thing that happens to him is he's tested in the area of his dietary practices. You say, well, that's not a very big test. Well, it was for Daniel. You see, Daniel felt that there were many of the items that he was being asked to eat in Babylon would defile his body. They were against the laws that he knew. And yet Daniel was smart enough, even as a young youth, to negotiate with his captives and had enough trust in God to believe that the outcome would be favorable. Let me remind you the story. He went to his captives and he said, just give me my normal food and I'll be fine. And they said, if we don't give you what the king has ordered for you to eat, we'll lose our heads. Daniel said, well, give me 10 days of my own food and look and see if you can see any difference between me and the other captives. Now that was a real step of faith, but it was also a negotiation. He had so much faith in God that his countenance and his health would be just as good or better than the other captives that he was willing to live by the test. And so instead of Daniel being tested, God was being tested. Would he show Daniel his goodness, his mercy, and his grace? And he did, because in 10 days, Daniel actually looked better than the other captives who were eating the king's food. It was a negotiable item. I don't mean negotiable that he was willing to eat their food. It was negotiable because he negotiated on the strength of God's promises. Now, you think that that was probably the only test that Daniel had, but there were many other tests. Daniel had his good times and his prosperity times, but he also was tested again when jealousy of those that were in Babylon knew that he was special, and it bothered them that he was special. And so they encouraged the king to make a law that said if anybody bowed down to anybody but the king, they would go into a lion's den. Now, Daniel believed in prayer, as I hope all of you do. I hope all of you realize the incredible power, privilege, and promises that come through prayer. This was not negotiable to Daniel. Daniel was going to bow down to God and pray, regardless of the consequences. Well, you know the story. Daniel's caught praying. Daniel's thrown in the lion's den. He's left overnight. Next day the king comes and The lions lost their appetite. Daniel's safe and secure in the lion's den. Now, it wasn't that they weren't hungry, because as you remember, those that accused Daniel were thrown in and they were eaten right away. But the king saw that Daniel's God was greater. And as a result, he was tested. It was not negotiable. Again, he trusted God, and the outcome was good. But I want you to reflect on life. Life is like Daniel. He spent almost an entire life in captivity. He was tested multiple times. He had the wisdom of knowing what was negotiable and what was not negotiable. Most of all, he had the wisdom to trust God, whether it was over the food that he ate or whether it was over his protection. He had the trust in God to find his way through the tests of life. It's a good thing for us to remember. As a matter of fact, I've often wondered how much influence Daniel had on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who wouldn't bow, who wouldn't bend, and who didn't burn. Did they get their courage from watching Daniel? Maybe so, maybe not. Nevertheless, we can learn from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and we can learn from Daniel that when we're tested, we can put our trust in God. But we need the wisdom to know what's negotiable and what's not negotiable. One wise pastor once told me, he said, every time you come to a decision point and you either have to fight or to back off, you need to decide, is this a hill to die on? It's a good question. Is this temptation a temptation that you're willing to die for? Is this test in your life something you're willing to die for? Or are you so convinced that God's rules, regulations, and instructions are greater than any test, and that you just can trust in him even by sight if it doesn't make sense? That's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.